Whoever travels this country and observes the face of nature to give full effect to the natural resources of the country, a great part of the population should be swept from the soil.
As you can see there, that under the circumstance where the Irish had lived, they were living in very dramatic scenes in the 5 Points in New York, which would lead to basically them developing a horrendous name right throughout the history. For the next 100 years, the Irish dominated New York.
Every historical record points to the Great Famine of 1845 as the spark that sent a surge of Irish emigration across the Atlantic to America's east coast. On their arrival, they struggled. They struggled to obtain a scanty living in a dreadful place, and the only reason for that was they were Irish. And yet the kept coming statistics revealed that, in 1902 the city of New York had more Irish there than in Dublin.
The Irish would have been emigrating to the United States of America from around the 1600s and probably even before it. But however, it was the famine that caused them to emigrate in desperation really towards the east coast of the United States of America, which would have been New York and Boston, Maryland and places like that.
The Irish immigrants were forced to live in tenements that were horrifying by any modern standard.
They had was hardly ideal because the poorest of the poorest, I suppose, that they didn't escape onto the cotton ships, ended up in these places that was not suitable to modern standard, ended up probably going to Dublin.
At the center of this ordeal stood 5 Points, an area developed by 3 intersecting streets on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. This area grew in reputation throughout the international community for its exceptional levels of corruption, debauchery, and brutality.
Dickens was in New York from February 12 to March 5, during which time he was feted at a Boz ball, had dinner with Washington Irving, and complained, "I am sick to death of the life I have been leading here, worn out in mind and body, and quite weary."
This is the place, these narrow ways, diverging to the right and left, and reeking everywhere with dirt and filth. Such lives as are led here bear the same fruits here as elsewhere. The coarse and bloated faces at the doors have counterparts at home and all the wide world over. Debauchery has made the very houses prematurely old.
Bands of filthy wretches, Irish immigrants, drunken loafers, disgusting objects bearing the form human. Walt Whitman.
This account which came directly from Charles Dickens and Walt Whitman.
Gaze on it mentally, fair reader, and realize, if you can, while sauntering down Broadway, rejoicing in all the refinements and luxuries of life, that 1 minute's walk would place you in a scene like this. Gaze on it, men of thought, when treading the steps of the City Hall or the Hall of Justice, where laws are framed, and our city's interests discussed and cared for. 1 minute's walk would place you in this central point of misery and sin. Gaze on it, ye men of business and of wealth, and calculate anew the amount of taxation for police restraints and support, made necessary by the existence of a place like this. And gaze on it, Christian men, with tearful eyes, tears of regret and shame, that long ere now the Christian Church has not combined its moral influences, and tested their utmost strength to purge a place so foul. For this, reader, is the 5 Points, a name known throughout the Union, in England, and on the continent of Europe. The 5 Points, a name which has hitherto been banished from the vocabulary of the refined and sensitive, or whispered with a blush, because of its painful and degrading associations. The 5 points. What does the name import? It is the synonym for ignorance the most entire, for misery the most abject, for crime of the darkest dye, for degradation so deep that human nature cannot sink below it. We hear it, and visions of sorrow, of irremediable misery, flit before our mental vision. Infancy and childhood, without a mother's care or a father's protection, born in sin, nurtured in crime, the young mind sullied in its first bloom.
There were swinging ladies in canary cages, fighting mobs. Crime-ridden streets where murder prowls along every path. In this infamous 5 Points slum, Leonardo DiCaprio, Cameron Diaz, and Daniel Day-Lewis under the watchful eye of Martin Scorsese set out to tell the story of the gangs of New York.
Kerry, a county of beauty seen in its scenery, and natural and varied landscape which drove out into the Atlantic Ocean in a series of peninsulas. Those peninsulas, and the islands which chronicle the most westerly point in Europe, comprised an uncommon heritage of religious ruins, archaeological remains and popular folklore. As well as its scenery made the county an excellent destination for tourists. However, in the 1800s, it was a county of the desolation and of endemic poverty. The famine forced generations of Kerry people to leave in search of basic living.
It is said that the Carryonians were the second oldest criminal gang in New York. The gang was made up of Irish immigrants from County Kerry, Ireland. There was also a 19th-century Philadelphia gang of the same name. What is the remedy? Asked the Inquirer in desperation during the hot summer of 1849. Meanwhile, all hell had broken loose. We are told there are no less than 5 gangs of organized ruffians. Seasoned columnist George Foster identified 11 squads or clubs in Southwark and Moyamensing populated by loafers who give themselves outlandish titles. One Irish gang listed in Philadelphia was the Carryonians. By the 1820s, the Carryonians were part of the first wave of the New York street gangs. They were especially fond of targeting anyone who was of British descent. The Carryonians also fought a gang named the Pelters. The Irish gang are most known however for disrupting British actor William Charles Macready's performance at Astor Place around 1825. They eventually grew into one of the 5 Points' most brutal street gang. The Dead Rabbits, Roach Guards, and Chichesters. The Dead Rabbits were the largest and most powerful of the 5 Point gangs. Their battle uniform was a red strip and they carried a dead rabbit impaled on a pike before them into street battles.
People from Kerry, lovely people, but yet they were under the whole weight of the famine, and then ended up in America, where they became members of the Carryonians, obviously, and became one of the first New York gangs that would terrorise the streets of New York, particularly around the 5 Point area. But they weren't the first, and they certainly weren't going to be the last.